Good evening, Archer families, Archer parents and Archer students. Thank you so much for giving the time this evening so that we can be together and discuss this very important topic. I'm so pleased that we can have this opportunity for what I hope will be an evening focused on information. And I am going to be quite particular about going through as much information as I have to my fingertips with you this evening, because my key priority is that you feel informed and as a result as confident and supported by school as is possible at this time. The togetherness is going to be an important theme. We have, for the last 5 years that your child and for you as students have been Archers and been at the Archer community, worked together as one community, knowing that the most important thing is the success, the ability to thrive, the confidence and the happiness of each and every one of our young people. Some of that is being tested at the moment and was certainly tested last summer as well. But it's by being together, by ensuring that we retain a strong focus on our vision and our values, that we can ensure that we come through this with the most important outcome, which is those happy and successful young people being able to go on and do whatever it is that they want to do. That every door is open to them. This evening I can't have all of the answers, and that is an unusual place for me to find myself, and one that doesn't sit that easily. I'm sure you can appreciate that. But what I can do is to take every element of control that I can, and that's in ensuring that I do have access to all of that information, that I am supporting other school leaders and your children's teachers in being informed and careful in the steps that they are taking. And that will be done with the greatest of care and the greatest of commitment. I'm hoping this evening that once I've had the opportunity to share some quite detailed information with you, that we will then have the time and space to answer your questions as much as we possibly can. That will chiefly be through exploring and taking on board perhaps some of your ideas and suggestions. But I hope above anything else that just by giving you the space to ask those questions, that you will feel more secure with next steps. We are incredibly mindful at school that the pressures on our Year 11 students and you as parents of Year 11 are probably the most particular right now. I'm also mindful that for a number of you, you also have children in Year 13, previous Archer students, and that is a double blow of complexity right now. But please know that we are in this together. We all want the same thing, which is for your young person to navigate this time with as much support as possible, their hand firmly held and their skilled subject teachers best placed to support them. So what I'm going to do now is to move into some points for discussion, reflection, and then some general information, and we'll then hand over to you for questions. I am joined this evening by Mr. Mustafa, Mr. Gillow, Mr. Oakley and Dr. Morrison, and they're all here to support should there be particular questions that they can provide additional guidance with. Towards the end of our time together this evening, I shall hand over to Mr. Gillow, and he shall just give some further information and guidance about next steps, particularly around sixth form applications, which I know is keeping lots of you very busy right now. Mr. Gillow is going to manage the chat function this evening, so if I could ask that you do have questions that you would like to pose, if you could put them into the chat, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation as best we can, so that we can base that on you having as much information to your fingertips as is possible, first of all. So if we look at this very famous painting together this evening, it might be a painting that is familiar to many of you, a painting of very choppy seas, a painting of a beautiful ship doing its best to navigate those choppy seas. But what we can see ahead is a beautiful blue sky and a sun starting to rise. It's a picture that I've always found very calming, actually, and very grounding. But if you look on either side of that picture, there's perhaps a few words that you as young people in Year 11 and as parents of Year 11 students might probably be able to relate to right now. If we think about emotions right now, I wonder if any of you are feeling any of those words. Uncertain, anxious, concerned, unsettled. They would all be absolutely valid emotions to be having at this time, and I won't deny their validity either. I wonder if some of those feelings and emotions might be leading to a bit of frustration, some fear, a lack of control, not knowing what the consequences might be, what the long-term damage could be, or whether there might be a need to pick up some pieces in the future. I think particularly parents, you might be conscious of that one. But all of those feelings and emotions, whilst they are valid and known, must lead us to exploring them, to facing them head on, to owning them, so that we can then invest them in what we do next, which is to take and try and take as much control as is possible. This question feels a particularly important one to ask. I had the privilege of doing Year 9 assembly this afternoon, and I asked them this question. But to genuinely ask this question, are you okay, feels important, and I target that particularly at our students this afternoon, but parents, you're allowed to have that question asked of you as well. It's important that we have that internal dialogue with ourselves at the moment about whether we are okay, but that we're also having that external dialogue. And students and parents, I would urge you to reach out to your teachers at school, to Mr. Mustafa, Mr. Gillow, to myself. We are all here to give you time and space to talk about how you are feeling and to try and provide as much opportunity to navigate solutions as is possible. But please don't have some of those more worrying feelings that we just explored on the previous slide and keep them within yourself. It's important that we are having that dialogue and talking together. I wonder if that picture might be familiar to some of you right now. I will be honest, Archer community, I felt a little bit like that as well, particularly perhaps over the Christmas holidays. They were a different type of Christmas holidays this year. But whilst we can acknowledge that that's how we might have felt about some of the announcements and decisions over the Christmas period and into the first week of January, I think we must always recognise that we did know that there was likely to be some kind of complicated scenario for our Year 11s this summer. We as a school have been conscious of that for some time, and as a result have been taking protective measures since last summer. We've reviewed a lot of policy and practice in school to ensure that we were ahead of the game should we need to be, and should this very devastating pandemic continue in the way that it has. Our priority throughout this time has been to safeguard our students, their achievements, their well-being, but also their outcomes. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we've already done to make sure that we are best placed for what may be ahead. This is something that needs to be said a lot. It's something that I say a lot to my staff at the moment, your teachers. You can do it, we can do it. We can tackle this obstacle ahead of us, these challenges ahead of us. We can do that because we're Archers. We have spirit, we have a real sense of commitment. We know that hard work does pay off. We value that, and never has that been more important within our supportive and nurturing community. So please, when you might feel a little bit down, remember you can do it. I believe in you, your teachers believe in you, and it's worth it in the end as well. So where are we in relation to GCSEs at the moment? Well, the process has not been decided. And I think what's incredibly important, first of all, this evening, is to be conscious that no decisions have been made, and that in fact there have been some quite misrepresentations in the media in recent weeks that I think have added to a sense of confusion, particularly for you parents and young people, where unfortunately the media at times has translated possibilities or options into facts, making things seem as if they're final, making things seem as if decisions have been reached, when in fact they haven't. I think for me, one of the most worrying things was that at no point was it announced, or has it been announced, that GCSEs have been cancelled, yet that word was used quite quickly in the sort of 48 hours after the Prime Minister's first announcement on the 4th of January. So it's important to know that this is an evolving time and that what we have to prepare for could change. And that's why we need to be nimble, protective and taking really controlled steps. What's key is that a national consultation has been issued by Ofqual, the exams regulator, and that was published last Friday. Unlike the previous consultation that took place during the period for exams last summer, this is very much an open consultation, and I would heavily urge all parents to read this document. It is lengthy, it is about 46 pages long. However, the reason I would urge you to do that is that it's only by being involved with this consultation that we can potentially shape its outcomes. I shall share the link for this consultation in the newsletter tomorrow, and I've also asked Mr. Mustafa to put it in the Year 11 bulletin. But building on our time together this evening, by then engaging with that consultation, we are perhaps putting ourselves and our young people's outcomes in the best possible position. The consultation closes next Friday. Therefore, we can only expect that there would be any final decisions to be made by the end of February at the earliest. Based on the timelines from 2020, it was roughly a month to 5 or 6 weeks after that consultation closed, and in fact, that was quite a drawn out process. I would prefer that the time and energy of the regulators was put into making good, solid decisions that then weren't changed later. So from my perspective, I would prefer them to wait a little bit longer before publishing their outcomes, and for them then to be well thought through and to be absolute. But again, we just must be conscious of those timelines together, both as a school and as families. But the consultation in itself is very useful because it does give us a further indication of what is properly being explored. And what I can see through that consultation is a real clear commitment to ensuring fairness, rigour and accountability for this process, both for young people and for schools. So what I shall do now is to sort of move on and look at what the Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, has said, and then some elements of this proposal with you. So what has the Secretary of State for Education said? And interestingly, this week the Secretary of State has in fact written to all head teachers directly with his policy viewpoints. Every day the Department for Education since the pandemic began last February, they have written to head teachers, but in fact this is the first time the Secretary of State has written individually to head teachers, and I think that in itself has been a helpful step forward. So what has he said? He has said clearly that he feels the level of disruption to education has led for the necessity for exams to be reviewed. And I think it's important that the word reviewed is used there and not cancelled. That this has come about from a result of concern surrounding the possibility of a level playing field for all young people in taking their exams. Is it fair, based on the very mixed experiences of education that young people have had in the past 12 to 18 months, fair in terms of them being able to be successful? That policy is therefore being reviewed to secure alternative arrangements. That students' results should be determined based on teachers' assessments of performance in each subject, informed by a breadth of evidence. And we'll explore what that breadth of evidence may mean or may look like shortly. That training and support will be provided to schools. Of course, we're not sure quite what that might look like, but it's clear that they are intending to do that. That at this point, the Secretary of State cannot be clear about when schools will be reopened. There is a hope that that will be in the period after February half term, and we should have more information about that following the national review of lockdown procedures on the 30th of January next week. It is certainly my hope that we can in some way begin to reopen after the half term, but of course it must be safe to do that. And I am hopeful that we will only do that once we can be as stable as possible, because the disruption experienced by so many students in the period before Christmas was very hard for everybody. We want everyone to be safe and to be well. So what has Ofqual said so far? Well, the regulator who has put together the consultation has put together a series of proposals, and we'll explore them one by one. But I think these facts, first of all, are important for you as parents and students. Firstly, that grades will be determined by teachers following a process of quality assurance. That results will be issued by exam boards who will remain accountable for the results, and that exam boards will record the results on certificates as is usual. Now, there is of course a lack of depth or detail behind any of those statements, but it does give us some assertions about where perhaps roles and responsibilities lie in this process. So let's go through step by step. What is the consultation enabling us to see as possible mechanisms for GCSE grading? So if we are taking the opportunity to be as in control as possible, we want to be as informed as possible and to explore what these different things may mean for our young people and for their teachers. So first of all, in terms of timing, the regulator, in this case, wherever I use the term regulator, I'm talking about Ofqual, is proposing that teachers make final assessments of student performance during late May or early June. That broadly, those decisions are made at the same time as students would usually be taking their GCSE exams. The key indicator there is that teachers make these final assessments, and that is a shift perhaps from initial guidance that was given back in the summer of 2020 around how GCSE and A-levels were decided then. Types of assessment. The regulator is proposing that exam boards could provide papers which would be marked by teachers to help inform assessments, that exam boards may then sample teachers' marking for quality assurance and to ensure comparable outcomes across different types of schools. The regulator is suggesting that exam boards develop papers based on previous papers and new questions. They're also suggesting that teachers may have some choice of topics to take into account any disruption to studies, and that may lead to multiple papers being made available. The regulator is considering whether prior assessed work completed by students and graded by teachers can be taken into account. So there's a whole breadth of things being considered there, and again, there isn't detail that sits underneath those statements. From a professional perspective as a teacher, much of that leads me to want to ask lots of questions. I'm quite sure it does for you as well. But what does it help us to feel more informed about? Well, it makes a suggestion that outcomes for young people will be decided from a multiple range of sources, that some of those decisions will be reached by work that has already been completed by students or will be completed by students over the coming months. It's perhaps timely to remember that Year 11, at the point of school closure, had not in fact completed half of Year 11, and that in itself is a significant marker. But it also indicates that there will be further involvement from the exam boards and that some form of externally set work will be set. Of course, that does pose a question as to why, if young people can do these sorts of exams, why they couldn't do their formal exams. And please know I'm wrestling with that as well. But it does suggest that we need to be ready on a multiple of fronts to support our young people in having a range of evidence available from work they have already completed or work they will complete, and then to be prepared to take some externally set assessments towards the kind of May-June period. What about coursework? For a number of our young people, you complete non-exam assessment work, whether that be in drama, whether that be in food technology, whether that be in music. Currently, the regulator is proposing that non-examined assessment should be taken into account, and that is something that's very pleasing to see, because for some of those courses, the weighting of the non-exam assessment is very high. The regulator says that students should not be penalised if they've not been able to complete non-exam assessment for reasons beyond their control. Now, at this point, all of our young people are on schedule to complete their non-exam assessment, and we have already made provisions in school for young people to complete outstanding assessments that would be completed usually at this time of year. For example, in drama and in music, we have young people coming into school to do that work in the coming weeks, and you may, dependent on your subject, have further opportunities to do such things. That the weighting of non-exam assessment may change and would need to be recorded by teachers with clear evidence on the circumstances for each student and the impact of decision making. And as a school, we have already been looking at the ways in which we track our decision making based on the work produced by each young person. But what that might mean at a national level is certainly a question that I have raised in my response to the consultation. So there needs to be fairness across different centres there in terms of the weighting of non-exam assessment. They are saying that exam boards would not be expected to moderate non-exam assessment. Again, that does pose a question for me, because traditionally that is what happens. We send off that coursework to be moderated by an exam board. If that's not going to happen, then we need to look at how they will be ensuring consistency of that weighting and marking across different centres. But what remains most important for our young people is that they have the opportunity to complete all of that work to the same standard that they usually would, in the same conditions that they usually would. We are being guided at this stage to consider that greater weight should be given to evidence completed closer to the time of the final assessment. That would feel sensible and proportionate, but again leads us to need to think carefully about broader opportunities for revisiting non-exam assessment where that's possible. Where can exams be taken? Well, the regulator is proposing that exams should be set within a set period of time to ensure fairness. But that may also reinforce the need for a menu of papers. So, for example, if some students need to study at home, would that be possible, owing to perhaps for self-isolation reasons or ill health? There's much to be explored there to insecure fairness, but there is a proposal that as opposed to a set date when an exam would be completed, it may be phased over a series of weeks. What support is the exam board perhaps proposing? Well, the regulator is suggesting that exam boards should provide support materials and training to help teachers assess students, including exemplars and information on other performance evidence that could be taken into account. Now, that's normal. We would usually have that kind of resource made available to schools, but there's a suggestion here that that support should be increased. That would, of course, be welcomed, but I think does lead me at school level to want to look at how we can provide broader support from our own structures in advance of that, and in case that doesn't materialise. That there is a focus on ensuring fairness and avoiding bias and discrimination. That is of the most importance, something that we put a great deal of effort into with the process last summer and always do in all approaches to our work at school. The regulator is also proposing additional guidance for schools on areas that could impact performance that are outside of a student's control, for example, illness and bereavement. Now, we're used to managing that. There's a process called special considerations during any exam period, so I'm interested to see how that process may be developed this year. I would be particularly interested to see whether that would include weighting of the amount of time a young person has spent out of school owing to self-isolation. And we have calculated that information for each child very carefully at school. What about in terms of accountability? Well, the regulator is proposing that school leaders sign off on all grades entered and submitted, and that's exactly what happened last summer. So last summer there was a very thorough process where grades were entered by the exams officer, and then I sat with the exams officer and with Mr. Oakley, the assistant head, and we went through each and every grade, and then I signed off a series of formal documentation before we submitted them. We were very pleased at that stage that there were no errors in any of our work. What about quality assurance? The regulator is proposing that exam boards develop mechanisms to work together to ensure consistent quality assurance approaches for schools. Now, what does that mean? You will be aware that your child will be sitting different subjects that sit under different exam boards, for example, AQA or Edexcel. It is important, therefore, that there is some consistency in how AQA and Edexcel, for example, approach this issue. That is one of great importance for myself, and I know also for school leaders, so that we don't find ourselves needing to do one thing one way to meet the needs of one exam board and then differently for another, because there is a margin of error that is possible. So I'm keen to see what comes back from that question, but I certainly feel that's very important. The regulator is also proposing that exam boards should sample evidence on which grades are determined at subject level. Again, I would feel that that is incredibly important. That didn't happen last summer and surely could only help fairness. But again, a lot more information would be needed to support schools in being able to do that really well and to put every young person in the best possible position. What about appealing grades? Well, this process was one that was very complex for schools and young people last summer, particularly perhaps for A-level students, owing to the issues that arose following the algorithm problems towards the end of August. There are some significant changes being suggested here compared to the summer of 2020. And again, I think it's important for you to be conscious of what different outcomes might be proposed this time around. So the regulator is proposing that teachers should not tell students their grades, but that once results have been issued, students who believe their teacher has made an error should be able to appeal to the school on that basis. The regulator is proposing that schools should then review the marking of evidence used to arrive at the student's grade. And the regulator is proposing that appeals should be considered by a competent person appointed by the school who was not involved in the original assessment, for example, another teacher at the school or another setting. The regulator is proposing that if an error is found, the outcome of the teacher assessment should be adjusted up or down, but should only be changed if the person undertaking the appeal was found that the outcome was not legitimate, that the outcome could not have been arrived at by a person who was reasonably exercising their academic judgment. That's very broad, and that does suggest that whilst it is a step forward in terms of a thorough appeals process, is equally not perhaps going as far as would be usually the case. The regulator is proposing that students should be able to appeal further to exam boards, but only once they've received the outcome of an appeal by the school. That's quite a significant change because there was no opportunity to appeal to the exam boards in the summer of 2020. The regulator is then proposing that these appeals would not be on the merits of teacher assessment or the school's appeal decision, but rather on the grounds that a school had not acted in line with procedural requirements. So again, that's an interesting shift, that the focus is very much on procedure and mechanisms rather than on how a decision has been made based on the evidence produced by a child. And that's something I feel we want to look at very carefully at school level. What does that lead me as a head teacher to want to think about? We already have a very thorough appeals process at school, and we have very strong internal systems for managing appeals around grades. We've already taken some time to look through our appeals process based on our experiences last summer as well. And I think it's important that we ensure that we are honouring all of these mechanisms, because ultimately we want the same thing here. We want your young person to secure the best outcome for them, and I want that to be secured outside of an appeal process. I want to ensure that they secure the best grade and there is no requirement for any form of appeal, because everybody feels satisfied by the outcome that has been achieved, and that will always be my priority. But you must be aware of what may be available to you should you be unsatisfied with the decision that has been reached. Final couple of points in terms of what the consultation is enabling us to consider. One of them has been related to results day. You will be aware that results days are very traditionally set within the last couple of weeks of August for both GCSE and A-levels, and they've always been scheduled that way for many, many years. But the regulator has asked a question. They have asked schools and anybody who is taking part in the consultation to consider whether results day should be reviewed and whether the publication of results should be brought forwards to reduce any potential pressure on the appeals process. And that's a simple yes or no question in the Ofqual consultation, but something that will be very interesting to look at, because the knock-on implications of that for sixth form applications, for university implications, are quite significant. But also more generally for the management of the summer term in schools, should, for example, they consider to bring results day forward to July. So something just to bear in mind and to think through. And then what about provision for private candidates or overseas students? Now, the reason for me raising this is it does pose some other questions that I shall refer to a little bit later. But the regulator is reviewing whether if it is possible for exams to be taken safely in some countries, it may be appropriate to have that mechanism available, for example, to private candidates. Now, some of you do sit exams in school with us traditionally as private candidates. For example, a number of students historically have taken a home language or religious studies. And so that is something we need to consider. But it does also raise a question about whether, if you can sit the exam in one country but not this country, is it possible that there could be a disparity in grading for the same qualification? And that again is something I wish to be very conscious of, because it does give concerns about equability across different experiences for young people. So where does that leave us? I said I didn't have answers this evening. I have strategies and approaches that I shall share with you in a moment. But it does leave us with lots of questions, and it's important that we are very overt about what those questions might be. A full CAG process. Well, to be clear, parents, you might not know what a CAG process is. I can assure you at school level, we're very, very assured of a CAG process, having done it last summer. But a CAG process stands for the term Centre Assessed Grades, and that is the process that was used last summer to secure students' results. But that process changed midway through. So what schools thought they were doing and what they worked in good faith to do was then evolved in the sort of latter days of August, owing to some issues at a national level. So a CAG process is when a school derives the grades for a young person based on the evidence that they have performed over time and based on their sort of starting point data and target and predicted grades. What I think is interesting within the Ofqual consultation is there's no suggestions about how grades may be derived from a wider data set. And I think that that is something we need to explore, and certainly is something that I will be putting forward in the consultation. There's also no mention within the consultation the role of algorithms and what they may play in this process. You will, of course, no doubt be aware of the quite significant damage that was done in relation to algorithms for A-level students last summer, and that led to them being reversed and then led to them not being used for GCSE gradings. Whilst algorithms clearly were not used successfully this summer, there is a need at some level to consider how standardisation across centres might happen for benchmarking purposes and for fairness. And I think that is something that we as a school need to continue to raise to ensure that we know what parameters we're going to be asked to work within, but also so that you as students and as parents are aware of the parameters that we are being asked to work within. That there may be an added layer of decision making that is outside of the work produced by a young person, as was the case last year. The consultation is very focused on this idea of mini exams. As I have alluded to already, my concern is that if they can sit mini exams, why could they not perhaps sit full exams? And again, that is a question for us all to reflect on. But the suggestion, of course, that perhaps these mini exams be set by the exam board, but then marked by us as a school or externally marked. The suggestion with the consultation is that they would be marked by school. And would there be some kind of pre-release material? There was a lot of focus on that being a potential option back in the autumn, but there's less focus on that in the consultation. There's more of a focus on the provision of multiple papers or a menu of papers. I would perhaps suggest that pre-release material, you may remember this yourself, parents, from your time at school, there used to be a real focus on pre-release material, source books and that sort of thing, could potentially be very useful and very helpful this time around. In terms of the weighting of assessed work completed in schools, such as coursework and performances, the suggestion, of course, is very clear that assessed work will be considered, but how that weighting will be decided at a national level is less clear. And I do feel that it would be useful for there to be national frameworks there to support fairness. Also, the weighting of internally assessed work. We are very fortunate that all of our students have completed a full set of mock exams completed in formally assessed conditions. That's not the case for all schools, and many schools are struggling right now because traditionally they take their mock exams in January. But we have that full set of exam papers. We intend to build further forwards with further internally assessed work. We want to be clear of how much weighting we might be able to give that work. This idea of building an evidence base leads to the thought of, well, does that lead to a portfolio of work for each learner with a selection of decided pieces of work that best showcase the abilities and performance of that student? That is certainly something we are strongly considering at school. How the staggering of these mini exams might happen in terms of them happening over a set period of time. There are, of course, concerns there about fairness in terms of whether content could be leaked, of cheating, and all of that has to be taken into account. A sample of teacher marking and learning portfolios, this idea that exam boards may do some of that sampling, those things feel very sensible to me. But again, we would want to ensure that we were best placed to do that well for every learner. Exam boards set controlled assessment. That's a little bit like pre-release material that I just touched on. But again, could they set an extended piece of coursework to be completed during a set period of time in the coming weeks? Again, that would feel like an option to me that we should and could be considering. It could surely be a level playing field, and was certainly something in the previous specifications that was very popular and done very successfully. Open book exams. There's little reference to that in the consultation, but again, it would be something that I would consider could be a real leveller for our young people and could ensure that they were best placed for success. And the role of online assessment. There are suggestions within the consultation that exams could be sat at home, but there's little specificity. One would suggest that perhaps some real thorough work needs to be completed looking at online assessment and how that could be delivered successfully. We have already been doing some work at school level looking at different types of software that we could invest in that would enable us to do robust assessments for young people whilst they are at home. Mr. Oakley has been piloting that with some of his classes, and we're keen to do a further pilot in the coming weeks because we believe it could help us to secure a strong evidence base for each student. And then there's a question that I write in my peach box on the side of the slide there, and that is IGCSEs. You may not be familiar with IGCSEs, but they are a different type of GCSE qualification that are commonly sat by students in independent schools. Currently, IGCSEs have not been cancelled, and that's a point of great interest to me. The reason that state schools very rarely take IGCSEs is that they are not counted in league tables, they're not counted by Ofsted. So it puts a state school, in a very difficult position in terms of their performance mechanisms. However, if IGCSEs are not cancelled, is that something that we should consider as an opportunity for our young people? Now, that wouldn't be possible or appropriate for all subjects, owing to the specification requirements. For example, different books may have been studied, or different periods of time if it was history. However, for some subject areas, there's quite a significant overlap in relation to the specification content. And so what we are doing at the moment is just exploring, and this is only exploring, whether it would be appropriate and possible to perhaps do both. For us to submit our grades for GCSEs for students based on the requirements that may be issued to us in line with what I've just suggested, but perhaps offering the opportunity for our students to also perhaps take IGCSEs in some subjects. As I said, that is not a firm position on the part of the school, but it is something that we are exploring. It is my duty and my responsibility to do everything that I can to best place our students for success. And it just feels like something that I should look into and something that could be a security blanket for our students as we move forward. So more to come. But for now, if you just park that idea in your minds as something we are looking at school level. So where does this leave us at this particular point? Well, it leaves us with a real agenda of prioritising, of ensuring that we are putting our energy, our time and our thoughts into the most important things. And first and foremost, that's the quality of education provision for our students, with a real focus on knowledge and on skills. Education is important regardless of GCSEs. It's important because it enables young people to grow up. It enables young people to be best placed for their futures. It enables them to move on into the world of further study and to the world of work. Whether or not a young person takes a GCSE in maths, for example, they still need to be highly numerate to succeed in the modern world. So regardless of anything to do with our examination process, it is absolutely paramount that our young people continue to work as hard as they are doing right now, and that they do that for its own sake. They do it because they value learning. They do it because they value the opportunities to be the brightest and most successful version of themselves they can be. And parents, that's something we need to do together, to continually reassure our young people that the learning that they are doing is of value and importance, whatever decisions are made at a national level in relation to their qualifications. Quality assessment. We have strong timelines in schools, strong assessment maps. And for us, it's about ensuring that those assessment maps are valid and appropriate for the different things that may be asked of us in coming months. And one of the things that we're doing with heads of department at the moment is looking at how we can develop our assessment strategies and review the types of assessment that are being completed. At this point, as I said in my note to all parents last week, we fully intend to be working towards assessments that usually happen around February half term and assessments that usually happen in what we call our March mocks in March towards the Easter holidays. Those March mocks are usually just core subject exams. But one of our reflections from last summer was that it would have been hugely helpful if we'd had a greater breadth of assessments completed in exam conditions in the spring. At this point, we intend to continue with the EBAC mocks in March as previously advertised. So again, we should be working towards those timelines and those points as a school community. The building of assessment evidence for every student. I reference this in the term of a learner portfolio. But we've already begun that work at school, and heads of department are working hard in their teams to bring together the consistency of that work over time. We had introduced a new assessment strategy from September based on our experiences last summer, and that involved, for example, the development of our depth assessment fortnight in October that you will be familiar with. That was a key pointer of having formal, consistent assessed work across groups of students, and that has proved very helpful already at this point. Our intervention programme. Commonly at this time across the spring and into the early summer, there would be a raft of interventions happening at school to accelerate students' progress. That continues regardless of us having to operate as an online school. So many young people have been involved, for example, in the My Tutor programme. Many young people have worked with some of our tutors in maths and English. That work will continue. Our enrichment programme develops further next week, with children having the opportunity to have chosen different subjects to do in their Tuesday afternoon enrichments. We will continue to do that intervention as we would in school, because it's about closing gaps, it's about raising achievement and ensuring that every young person is best placed for success. Our evidence base for each student links to this point about a learner portfolio or assessment evidence, but it's about ensuring consistency across each young person, particularly perhaps if they've had more time out of school than another student, and that's looking at ensuring that we have a strong sort of categorisation that sits around that. Standardisation and moderation are very key functions within a school. That is where we ensure the validity of our exam papers, the validity of our marking and the consistency of our marking. We have strong systems and processes already, but we would like to further evolve and develop those to ensure that we are standardising and moderating all parts of a student's potential portfolio of work to the same degree of scrutiny. And then, of course, it's about preparing our students for life beyond Archer. Always the hardest bit for me to say and to think about at this point, but of course we are preparing our Year 11 students to move on to their next stage, to sixth form, to apprenticeships, what it is that they want to do next. Well, what's key there is that they're best placed for that success regardless of how their GCSE outcome may be derived. If you want to do biology A-level, you need to have completed the course for biology to the end of Year 11, because otherwise you simply won't have enough knowledge, you won't have enough skills to be able to tackle that biology A-level. And that will be the same across all subject areas. It is quite likely that colleges may introduce some forms of baseline assessment when students start in September. So it's absolutely key that they are able to flourish and succeed in all areas of their learning. So we must make sure that we have completed that quality education I talked about at the beginning, so that young people can go on and do whatever it is that they want to do, and to do it confidently. I believe that by prioritising all of these things, we can then be the following three things that are the most important aspect here. That we can be nimble and flexible to changing demands because we have taken protective steps. We have prepared effectively so that we can meet a different series of outcomes, knowing that we may be issued with one set of guidance in the early spring and that we may be issued with a different set of guidance in the later spring or summer. And we must be conscious, parents and students, that that is possible. That has happened before and that has happened in recent months. And we must be conscious that one set of expectations may shift, and that by being well prepared, we can adjust to those. We can put our energies into the right places. That we're protective of you, our young people, and their achievements, and that that is done by being thorough, by being rigorous, and that we're confident in securing the best possible outcome for each student in line with their progress. So in line with the points that they had got by their December mocks, then by assessments that are taken in February, by assessments that are taken in March, that journey of improvement that happens across Year 11, that is clear, that is articulated, and that you as a young person know what is the fair and best outcome for you, and parents, you know that as well. It may well be that we all want to get a grade 9 for everything, but that isn't necessarily the best possible outcome for each student. We have to be fair and appropriate and measured here, and that those grades that are awarded are in line with the progress and ability of that young person. We are, as a school, able to come at this complex and uncertain set of scenarios from a position of strength, and that gives me confidence. I know that that gives my teachers confidence, and I hope parents and students that it gives you confidence as well. As a school, we have 3 years of outstanding GCSE results. They are significantly above national averages. Should there be some form of algorithm in some kind of way, that's a real positive, that's a real plus, and that certainly was the case this summer, that we are already seen to be an outstanding school that would be online and in track to secure outstanding outcomes this year. But our starting point data is very strong for our students. That again is a safeguarding measure for our young people. We would expect young people in our school to do very well. Students securing their first choice in post-16 destinations. Because of our partnership work, particularly with Woodhouse College, our young people were able to go where they wanted to go last September. And for myself and Mr. Gillow and Dr. Morrison, who are very involved in that work at the end of August, that was incredibly important. And the fact that that happened this summer, the same as it had done the summer before, despite the complexities, was so important. And that simply is because of the valued partnership work that we have with our sixth form providers, chiefly, as I've said, Woodhouse College, but also Barnet and Southgate College and other colleges as well. We completed a full evaluation of the process that we went through last summer, and that led to a development of a range of internal systems and processes, because we had the foresight and the knowledge to know that we were likely to have a complex scenario this summer, and we wanted to be best placed to tackle it. But also because some of those learnings from last summer simply led us to ask, as professionals, to ask ourselves different questions about how we could do things better anyway to secure the best possible education and outcomes for our young people. And that's been a really informative journey. Whilst the CAG process itself was slightly traumatic, in fact, some of the steps that came from it have been helpful for us as a school. We had a very strong and successful CAG process last summer that was supported by strong policy and strong process. That can be seen in the fact that less than 3% of our grades were uplifted by the exams regulator. Our exams were accurate, consistent, and our students did secure the best outcomes that they were in line to get. We had no errors in our 2020 data entry, and that should be incredibly reassuring to you as students and parents. We introduced a new assessment strategy in September, and I've mentioned it a little bit already, but that one of the factors there was about our depth assessment fortnights. And for those of you with younger children in the school, you'll be aware that the second depth assessment fortnight has just taken place. That's just one area in school where we've seen from the process of last summer that there were things that we could formalise more that would help document the journey of a young person through school. We have the confidence of a full set of Year 11 mock exams that have been completed in exam conditions, that have involved full papers, that have been standardised and moderated. We've introduced formal assessment storage mechanisms in school to ensure that we have a full evidence base for each young person. I'm aware that that has caused a little bit of frustration with you wanting to have access to mock exam papers. We completely recognise why you want that, and we of course wish to share those papers, and we're doing our best to do that as quickly as possible. However, you must also be aware that if we don't have that evidence in school, the potential implications for your young person are more significant should we need to produce the evidence that we have on your young person's performance. So know that we're not trying to be difficult there, we're simply trying to be protective. That depth assessment continues regardless of our remote school phase, and that needs, we feel, to be better supported by software, and I've touched on that with you already. Whilst the consultation with Ofqual suggests that additional training will be provided for schools, we've already taken some steps at school level to increase our training offer to our departments and subject teachers. I'm very fortunate that I worked for OCR, the exam board, for the best part of 18 years before taking the headship here at school. And I would say that's one of the best things that I ever did, in that it enabled me to be part of the process of writing exam papers, of standardising grades, of standardising marking. But the quality of training I had as a result of that certainly led me, I think, to being able to be a better teacher. But it also means that I have a range of contacts within that exam board world and have already approached a number of colleagues to look at some advanced training for our heads of department and subject teachers in relation to standardisation and moderation. And I think that will simply give additional confidence to my wonderful members of staff, but also to you and to our students as well. So what's the most important thing that we need to do right now? Take a deep breath, young people and parents. There's a lot of what ifs, but there's also a lot more of yes. Yes, we need to take some clear and definitive steps and action to be best placed for success. Young people, that statement there is for you. Everything that you are doing right now, however hard it may be in different ways, you're doing it for you. You're doing it for your future, the future that I wish to be bright and wonderful, because that is what you deserve. So working hard and working with your teachers, working together, home and school together, that will put you in the best possible position, regardless of the scenarios we find ourselves in. So when and if it's feeling a bit hard, When and if it's feeling a bit uncertain, please just remember that you are doing it for you, that it's a prize worth having in the end, and that you are capable of doing great things. We all want the same thing. My absolute commitment to my students, to my staff, and to you as parents will be unwavering during this time. We do this because we want young people to be successful and to thrive. The hardest thing about being an online school is not having those rhythms and routines of everyday life, the opportunity just to be with young people. It's a very special thing. But all wanting the same thing means that we must continue to work together. One of the biggest strengths of our school is that we do work together. I regularly say that my young people should feel that their hand is firmly held, and they really should feel that right now. But parents, that extends to you as well, that we all come at this from the same position, which is being protective and supportive. That means that the dialogue between home and school must continue, and always taking into account that we will only ever do the best thing. That might sometimes mean that we have to have difficult conversations, particularly around things to do with assessment, to do with progress being in line with where it should be, to do with issues surrounding tiers of entry for exam papers. Those can be difficult conversations, but know that we will only ever seek to do what is best for your child. And I would ask that we continue to ensure that we're on the same page there, particularly when it could become a bit more difficult. So what do those next steps look like? I'm shortly going to hand over to you so that we can have the opportunity to answer as many of your questions as possible, and that feeling of working together, that transparent dialogue, feels even more secure. But the next steps would be key. The first one is for you students. Your parents already work hard enough, but young people, you are making us so proud. Your teachers regularly talk about how much they are enjoying working with you. The pride they had of you as a cohort in the way you conducted yourselves through your mock exams was something that made the teaching staff just look at you in a completely different way. We'd never had a cohort who took those exams quite so seriously, and you did yourselves a credit, and you should be very proud of that. You need to keep working hard. You need to hold on to that because you're doing it for you. Keep remembering that statement. The ongoing dialogue that I just mentioned is crucial. Much will shift and change in the coming weeks and months. I will take every step to ensure that you are informed, and I would urge you to ensure that you focus on that communication rather than at times some of the mixed messages that can come through from the press. I'm aware that that can become quite discombobulating. That we continue to work together, knowing that we all want the same outcome. That we are focusing on well-being. At a time when things can be so up and down, it's important that we're taking really strong steps to think about the routines and the habits that make for a healthy mind and a healthy life. This point in Year 11 is always stressful. We have to accept that. Those of you who are parents of older children and have lived this once before know that this point in Year 11, it's a tough point, but it's got a time limit to it and we come out the other side. But there are additional pressures right now that we have to take account of, and please know that at school level we are doing that, and we will continue to ensure that that wellbeing provision and support is really well provided and really accessible. And then it's about protecting post-Archer destinations, that you can go where you want to go with the most aspirational course and opportunity that is what you want for your future, and that will continue to open those doors. And once we've discussed and had the opportunity now to look at your questions, Mr. Gillow will then share some words to do with how we can best support those next steps. So I'm going to move away from my slide. You'll be delighted to know that that level of information can pause for a second. And what I shall do now is that Mr. Gillow is managing the different questions that have been coming through for me. And I think he's just going to put those questions forward so that I can access them. So I'm going to hand over to Mr. Gillow, who's hopefully going to make that possible for me in our modern world.
Unmute, please.
So Mr. Gillow, if you have the first question.
Unfortunately, Mr. is having to publish them due to a technical issue.
Ms Harrison, the first question is, will the SAT scores play a part in the GCSE assessment?
Thank you, Mr Mustafa. In terms of SAT scores, that's a really well phrased question. Thank you for raising that one. I mentioned at the beginning a question mark related to starting point data, and what I was able to highlight is that as a school we have very high starting point data, and last year starting point data was taken into account in how students' grades were derived. But it's interesting to note, as I've referenced, that the Ofqual consultation makes no reference of starting point data or how it might be used. And for me, that feels like a bit of a black hole of unknown questions, and is certainly something that I shall be raising in my responses and my response on the behalf of the school to the consultation. I think at this point that we have to bear in mind that it probably will in some way, because it usually would in terms of how grade boundaries and national sort of benchmarking of grade ratios is derived at a national level.
Okay, thank you. The second question I have here, Ms Harrison, is by the term open book exams, what resources may be allowed?
And thank you, a very useful question. I'm not sure. As I said, there's little reference to the possibilities of it within the consultation. It's more that I feel it's something that should be considered. For example, in English literature, should students be able to have access to their set texts to be able to take their exams? Should they be given a source book that they could refer to in their questions and their answers? Should they be given set pieces of content? I think all of those things are within the gift of the exam boards to consider, and could in fact create a more level playing field for young people moving forwards. And again, if parents are going to respond to the Ofqual consultation, I would encourage you to perhaps raise that as a suggestion of something that should be considered at this stage.
Okay, thank you, Ms Harrison. I haven't had any other questions at this stage, but I will just keep an eye for the next few moments in case any others do come through.
Well, parents, if you want to put any further questions into the chat function, then please do that. As I'm keen to answer as many of those questions as I can to ensure that you have a forum for the dialogue at this stage. However, I'm equally conscious that you need some time to digest that information and to think about it. The key theme being that we continue to work hard and to produce as much assessed evidence as we can over the coming weeks and months. Whilst we give you a little bit of time to pose any of those questions, I'm just going to hand over to Mr Gillow for a few moments, and he's just going to talk about some of the next steps at school in terms of supporting those sixth form applications. So I'll come back to you in a few moments. I'm going to hand over to Mr Gillow now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me well. I do hope you are all well, and can I just reiterate how proud that I am, as all of the Year 11 team are, about how hard Year 11 are working at the moment. Very, very impressed. So I just quickly want to just talk about what the next steps are if you're feeling a little bit like some of those last bits around college applications are not finalised, and what further support can be available for you. So any support you need regarding applications to any of the schools, sixth forms or colleges, you must reach out for that support now, even if you're unsure about what course it is you would like to go to. Some of you will have seen this week that the careers meetings have become phone calls, and we're looking to make that more of a virtual event to ensure that all students have their meeting, and in some cases second, if not third meetings if that is required. But a very bespoke drop-in approach is also there. If you need to talk to your tutors, Mr Mustafa or myself, please do reach out at any point so that we can help you along the way, because I understand that there's always going to be questions that you will need to ask just about what is best for you as you move into your next steps. That might well then lead to some of you needing to have an interview. Perhaps that's a virtual interview or one over the phone. Once again, if you'd like to have some support, perhaps a practice interview, then we can support with that as well. So please do ask if that's something you'd be interested in. Again, references, you may well need to write something yourself in terms of a personal statement, but again, you might just need some support to make sure that your references are in place. And please do, again, look out for any support that you can from us to make sure that everything is in place with those college applications. What we mustn't have is a position where students have left that too late, and deadlines are ticking by, and some colleges and sixth forms are beginning to close the door on those. So please keep an eye on all of those key deadline dates, and I think Mr. Mustafa will share as many of those as we can as we move into the next few weeks. The next thing is just a bit further down the line, there will obviously be further support for any people who've changed their mind, or if things have just not quite gone as well as you wanted. So we will be that security net for you as you move into the summer term, to make sure that the plans will be there, whether it just needs to be a plan B or even a plan C, to make sure you're on that most aspirational course. As well as that, obviously we are here as a pastoral support mechanism through this stressful time. We'll be looking at how we're dealing with stress and anxiety, and just thinking about resilience in a bit more detail as we move into the months ahead. But please do reach out if you're just finding it a bit hard in terms of the remote learning, the virtual lessons, or any concerns you've got about how you're going to actually revise to a purposeful way at home. The last thing I'll just mention is just that as we move into the summer term, the spring and summer term, we'll be looking at a Year 12 preparation programme. Last year we had some initial success where we created a very useful modular course where we built on your existing courses that were already being completed. And this will be an Archer outcome-based unit where we're looking at key skills that both sixth form providers and employers will be very interested to see, and also some preparation for A-level courses and other vocational courses that might well benefit you. And that should build on your portfolio if we need that as we move into those results coming in the summer. But my bottom and my last line to you all is just to say that please keep going, but please keep talking and reach out if you need any support. As I said, we are incredibly proud of you, and parents, please do reach out if you need to ask anything as well, because this stressful time I know can take a toll, but we can do it, and we'll go on one step at a time until we get there in August. Okay, thank you. I'll hand back to Mrs. Harrison. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gillow. Well, Mr. Mustafa, are there any further questions that have come through this evening?
There are, Ms. Harrison, yeah, so we've got our target grades being adjusted post mocks.
So the question is, are target grades being adjusted post mocks? We always review our target grades following our mock exams to ensure that they are appropriate and proportionate for our young people in terms of whether they need to have any stretch or the opposite side. However, please note that on the majority of cases, those target grades are quite fixed because they are set on starting point data. So whilst an internal review is going on, and whilst we do reach out to some young people and families to either increase those target grades or to look at some modification, that is done on a very small scale. However, we're going to keep that under review in the coming weeks in light of the different scenarios that we might find ourselves in. But mainly those target grades do remain as they are.
Okay, thank you. And next, Miss, was, although it might be out of scope, but can you please throw some light on how A-level colleges can make their decisions on basis of mocks and teacher assessments?
Thank you, Mr. Mustafa. So in terms of how sixth form decisions are reached based on internal assessment, I'm able to answer that question most thoroughly from the perspective of Woodhouse College. And in fact, as a governor at Woodhouse College, it's something we've been exploring in our Education and Standards Committee. One of the key benefits that was placed for our young people moving this year in the summer into September 2020 was the Year 12 preparation programme that Mr. Gillow has just referenced. But in fact, our young people had a great breadth of evidence to demonstrate that they were already able to work at a Year 12 standard, and that was hugely helpful. So what I would encourage at this point is those protective steps I've mentioned throughout this evening, and that is completing all of the work that we set currently. But then once we move into the Year 12 preparation programme, taking every opportunity that's afforded there as well to demonstrate that you are capable of studying at that level, even if perhaps your grades haven't got quite where you wanted them to. And that certainly was very helpful for myself when I was making personal recommendations for students last summer based on the courses that they wanted to study.
Thank you, Miss. A question from a student here. I think it's probably best to do two here at once, but should I still be revising every evening? And when will we get an idea of what's going to be on our mocks in March?
Okay, So question there about whether should I still be revising every evening? Yes, you absolutely should be. You should be doing exactly what you would be doing if we were in school, because you want to take control over your next steps and you want to be best placed to be as successful in any form of assessment and learning that happens next. It's also a really good habit to be in as you prepare to move into sixth form, because you would be expected to do that then as well. And then the second part of that question, which is when will we find out what's the content that we need to focus on for our March mocks, we would usually publish that at February half term, and we would intend to work on those same timelines now. But please be conscious that we are, of course, moderating our decisions there based on any frameworks that we're given at a national level to ensure that we're best placing our students in those assessments for success. So we would expect to be publishing the revision booklet for those exams at February half term, but please note there may just be a little bit of margin of movement there based on any information that comes out from the consultation.
Thank you. And a question here, I'm not sure if this is from a student or a parent, but students whose mental health has been affected and are receiving additional support from professionals, how would they get support if they're struggling in terms of assessments by teachers?
So in terms of mental health and wellbeing, if you're struggling in relation to completing assessments, then what we would be particularly wanting to do there is to provide you with some additional support at school that is very practically focused on revision strategies, on organising work and on time management. We have a series of programmes at school that we've run very successfully there before, and so I would urge that if that is something you are struggling with, particularly perhaps if it's about timing or perhaps getting a bit of a mental block, or feeling that you know it all before you open the paper and then can't remember anything, any of those sorts of issues, or more broadly, please may I ask you to reach out to Mr. Mustafa in the first instance and Mr. Gillow, because we can then put some next steps in place at school, and we have a great deal of experience in doing that very well.
And the next one, Mrs. How will the weightage for mock exams be considered? In all fairness, students did not know that the final exams would be cancelled. Will they still have time to cover up until the end of the year?
So in terms of weighting of the mock exams that have already happened and any internal assessment that we did in the autumn term and any future mock exams, we don't know yet what weighting could potentially be given to those exams. And as the question quite rightly points out, we didn't know that they would have to be given weighting when they were taken, although we were taking protective steps, and young people, we did discuss that quite significantly at school level, the potential for those exams to need to count more than they usually would. At this point, we need to await the outcomes of the Ofqual consultation before being able to make any decisions there in relation to weighting of exams. And we won't necessarily know that for, as I said, some weeks to come. So it continues to be most important that we continue to strive forward with our learning and making as much progress as we can, so that we can demonstrate improvement over time, because that's what we'd be doing if we were in school. The mocks are a pointer along the journey. They're not the end point. There's the whole of the spring term to do. So right now I would urge that the energy is on future learning, and as soon as we've some decisions surrounding weightings, then we will share them with you.
And one final thing here, Miss, can we have copies of mock exam papers to look at, please? Is there any kind of outline on when those papers may be available to us?
Yeah, so we have, in terms of mock exam papers being made available, we've started to do that over the last week, and we shall continue to do that. We're looking at our systems at the moment to do that as efficiently as possible. And our hope would be to do that as rapidly as we can over the coming weeks. I'm sure you can appreciate that with over sort of 15 papers per child, and some of them being quite comprehensive, we've had to really look at our reprographic systems there so that we can do it well. So we will do that as swiftly as we are able. But I would urge all students to concentrate on the very comprehensive feedback that they've already had from their teachers. They've often had that in the form of a template with very focused WWs and EBIs and focused agenda points. So I would urge that you focus on that bit right now, and that we will take every step that we can to provide those exam papers to our young people. We do recognise how useful they are, but we are of course trying to take those protective steps in school around your evidence base.
Really. And lastly, Miss, just to make sure that this session is being recorded and shared, is that correct?
Yeah, so this session is being recorded and we will share it subsequently. I'm conscious that it might be something that referring back to would be useful, particularly in the coming weeks, or if also parents and students wish to cross-check things that they read in the media to see where the current line stands. So I think that's our final question, Mr. Mustafa.
It is, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, Year 11 parents and students, thank you for giving me your time this evening. I simply hope it's been helpful. I simply hope that you feel a bit more informed now than you did before. But I hope, most importantly, you can see the efforts and the care that school is taking to ensure that you are best placed for success. You are the most important thing, and your success is the most important thing. But by continuing to work together, I've got no doubt that we will be able to secure the best outcomes that are possible by ensuring that we can be flexible and that we can reflect and meet the changing guidance that may come our way. I shall continue regularly to be in touch, and if it feels appropriate, we'll organise a subsequent evening like this in the coming weeks. I often think that this can feel a little bit more accessible than perhaps always writing very long documents to you. So I shall be in touch in the next couple of weeks. Mr. Mustafa will of course be in touch tomorrow with the Year 11 bulletin. But I'd like to thank you for all of your support, and Year 11 students, just well done. I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you. Good night.